My mind is a library of sins I did not commit. My soul is a reliquary containing the tarnished ghosts of heretics, traitors, and fools. I am a vessel, a walking archive of damnation, and the man I once was is the most faded and inaccessible text of all. They call me an acolyte, but the title is a euphemism, a polite fiction to mask the horror of my function. I am a mnemonic scourge, a tool. When the Ordos Hereticus finds a conspiracy too deep, a heresy too subtle, they do not merely hunt the living. They interrogate the dead, and I am the medium for that most unholy of conversations. They decant the memories of a deceased target, a cult leader, a seditionist, a rogue psyker, and pour them into the empty vessel of my consciousness. I walk through the corridors of a dead man's life, feel the chill of his fears, taste the sour bile of his hatred, and love the things he loved with a passion that is not my own. I become the ghost to hunt the ghosts he left behind. The process is a violation of the highest order, a trespass against the sanctified barrier between one soul and the next. To make room for the dead, the living must be scoured. My own memories, my own life, my own name, they are a palimpsest, scraped thin and overwritten 100 times. Each new assignment is a new death of the self, a new drowning in the ocean of another's experience. I am Inquisitor Vask's most precise instrument, and her most profound cruelty. She did not save me. She curated me. She found me in the ashes of my world, a lone survivor with a mind uniquely suited to her terrible art, and she hollowed me out to make a home for monsters. I do not remember the face of my own mother, but I can recall with perfect clarity the feel of a ritual knife sliding between the ribs of a sacrificial victim in the underhive of Gathus Prime, because the man who held it now resides in me. I do not know the name of the street I grew up on, but I know the secret, winding path to a hidden shrine of the corpse god on the forbidden moon of Xylos, for I have walked it 1,000 times in the dreams of a dead priest. This is what it is to be chosen by the Inquisition. It is not a call to glory. It is a sentence. A condemnation to a life that is not your own, a service that devours your very being until you are nothing more than a collection of useful, borrowed sins. The man I was is a whisper, a rumor, and I, the thing that wears his flesh, am the guardian of his silence. I am a lockbox of horrors, and the key has been thrown away. Before the fall, before I became a vessel, my life was dedicated to the preservation of memory, but in a form so much purer, so much more beautiful than the grotesque parody I now embody. My name was Lyrain. I was a memorialist on Cygnus X1, a world known for its crystalline arts and its quiet, dignified grief. We were a people who believed that a life, once lived, left an echo in the fabric of reality, a psychic resonance that could be captured, shaped, and preserved. My craft was the creation of chronocrystals, small, intricate gems that held the essence of a departed soul. It was not a science, but an art, a form of meditative communion. I would sit with the bereaved, listen to their stories, touch the cherished possessions of the deceased, and from this tapestry of love and loss, I would coax the lingering psychic residue of a person into a lattice of pure, flawless crystal. The process was slow, painstaking. It required a mind that was both an empty vessel and a finely tuned instrument, capable of receiving the subtle vibrations of a life's echo without coloring it with my own thoughts or emotions. It was a sacred trust. Each crystal was unique. Some would glow with a warm, gentle light, holding the memory of a mother's love. Others would emit a faint, melodic chime, capturing the spirit of a long-dead musician. I once crafted a crystal for a fallen guardsman that, when held, would give off the faint scent of ozone and promethium, a testament to his life of service. It was my job to listen to the dead and give them a voice that the living could cherish. My workshop was a quiet sanctuary, high in the needle spires of the capital city. The air was filled with the scent of polishing compounds and the faint, multi-tonal hum of the finished crystals that lined the shelves. My world was one of soft light, hushed reverence, and the profound, melancholic beauty of a life remembered. I believed I was performing a holy act, a small service that brought comfort to the grieving and honored the emperor's faithful departed. I saw memory as a sacred text, a thing to be preserved, not weaponized. I was a librarian of souls, and my library was a place of peace. How exquisitely ironic, then, that this very talent, this ability to quiet my own mind and become a receptacle for the psychic echoes of others, was the very thing that damned me. It was the quality that Inquisitor Vask saw not as a gift for comforting the bereaved, but as a resource to be exploited in her endless, secret war. She saw my quiet sanctuary and recognized it for what it was. An empty room, perfectly suited for the housing of monsters. I was a craftsman of beautiful, sorrowful things, a man content in his quiet purpose. And in the eyes of the Imperium's true masters, that contentment, that specialized skill, was nothing more than raw material waiting for the proper, brutal application. The end of my world began with a sky the color of a closing fist. There was no warning, no grand pronouncement from the planetary governor. Just a subtle shift in the Empyrean, a souring of the psychic atmosphere that only those like myself, attuned to the quiet whispers of the soul, could feel. A tension, a wrongness, descended upon Cygnus X1 like a shroud. Then the ships came. They were not the elegant merchant freighters or the stately naval cruisers we were used to seeing in orbit. These were brutal, ugly things of iron and dogma, their hulls scarred and pitted, bearing the stark, unforgiving sigil of the Inquisition. They hung in the heavens like judgment itself, blocking out the sun, casting our world in a perpetual, grim twilight. And then the purges began. The broadcasts called it a crisis of faith, a spiritual contagion. They spoke of a hidden corruption, a cancer in the heart of our society that had to be burned out. There were no specifics. No charges were ever laid. There was only the accusation, and the sentence, delivered as one. Stormtroopers in the black carapace of the Inquisitorial Storm Corps descended on our cities. They moved with a cold, terrifying efficiency, their lists already prepared. They went door to door, their voxcasters barking out names. Artists, poets, philosophers, religious leaders who strayed even a fraction from the approved imperial creed, and, to my horror, my own people. The memorialists. Our crime, I would later learn, was our intimacy with the dead. Our craft was deemed a form of spiritualism, a potential gateway to unsanctioned psychic phenomena. Our library of souls was to be burned, its librarians with it. I watched from my spire workshop as the city below became a charnel house. I saw my neighbors, my clients, people whose grief I had helped to soothe, dragged into the streets and executed with a single, dispassionate bolt round to the head. The chronocrystals, our beautiful works of art and memory, were gathered in piles and crushed under the treads of chimera assault vehicles, their light extinguished with a crunch of breaking faith. My sanctuary became my prison. I barricaded the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I could hear the screams from the street below, the rhythmic tramp of armored boots in the hallways of my spire. I was surrounded by the quiet, humming ghosts of 1,000 lives I had preserved, and all I could feel was the cold, encroaching certainty of my own death. They came for me at dawn. They did not bother with the door. A breaching charge blew it from its hinges, the blast throwing me across the room. 3 stormtroopers stepped through the smoke, their hot-shot lasguns leveled at my chest, the red dots of their targeting lasers dancing on my simple craftsman's robes. There was no rage in their faceless helmets, no malice, only a cold, implacable purpose. This was not an act of passion. It was an administrative procedure, a culling. Lyrane of the Cygnus memorialists, the sergeant intoned, his voice a flat, metallic rasp. By order of Inquisitor Vask of the Ordos Hereticus, you are condemned as a practitioner of unsanctioned psychical arts. Your life is forfeit. May the Emperor have mercy on your soul. He raised his weapon. I closed my eyes, 1,000 beautiful, stolen memories flashing through my mind. I waited for the end, but it did not come. Instead, a new voice, cold and sharp as chipped obsidian, cut through the air. Hold. The stormtroopers froze, their obedience absolute. A figure emerged from the smoke-filled doorway, stepping over the wreckage of my life's work. She was ancient, a relic of a woman held together by the arts of the Mechanicus and the sheer, indomitable force of her will. Her face was a mask of pale, taut skin stretched over an elegantly crafted steel skull, her eyes replaced with glowing, analytical green lenses. She wore the black power armor of an inquisitor, adorned not with gaudy symbols of faith, but with the subtle, terrifying marks of her authority. This was Inquisitor Vask. She moved with a liquid grace that belied her age and her augmentations, her presence sucking all the warmth from the room. Her glowing eyes scanned my workshop, taking in the shelves of chronocrystals, the tools of my trade, the terrified, pathetic man cowering before her. There was no pity in her gaze, only appraisal. She was a predator, and I was a curious specimen she had found in her hunting grounds. "You are the one they call the soul listener," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was a dry whisper, like papers skittering across a stone floor. "Your work is precise. You capture the echo, the resonance, without the taint of the warp. A rare and dangerous talent." She picked up one of my finest creations, a crystal containing the memory of a great general. She held it to her ear, her head cocked slightly. A faint, martial drumbeat, a sound only the sensitive could hear, emanated from the gem. "Impressive," she murmured, her tone that of a connoisseur examining a piece of art she was about to purchase or destroy. "You have an unusually placid mind, memorialist. A deep well of psychic silence. In most, such a thing would be a precursor to possession. In you, it seems to be a tool for clarity." She turned her gaze on me, and I felt as if my soul were being pinned to a board and dissected. "Your world is forfeit. Your people are a contagion that has been cleansed. Your art is heresy. By every law of the Imperium, you should be a corpse cooling on the pyres below." I could say nothing. My throat was a knot of terror. She took a step closer, looming over me. "However," she continued, "the Imperium does not waste resources. And a mind like yours is a resource of the highest value. Unrefined, misapplied, but valuable nonetheless." She gestured to the stormtroopers. "He is not to be executed. He is to be requisitioned. Strip him of his possessions. Erase his name from the planetary registry. He belongs to me now." The sergeant nodded. "My lady, what is his designation?" Inquisitor Vask looked down at me, a flicker of something that might have been grim satisfaction in her augmented eyes. "He is a vessel, an empty room. From this moment on, he is to be known as subject indentured, epsilon grade. Let his re-education begin." And just like that, Lyran, the memorialist of Cygnus X1, ceased to exist. He died in that workshop, not with a bolt round, but with a word. He was not killed. He was redacted. And in his place, a thing was born. A resource. A tool in the service of a cause so vast and terrible, it would burn away everything he had ever been. The ship was a void-faring cathedral of dread. A black ship of the Inquisition named the Veracity. The name was a cruel joke, for there was no truth within its halls, only dogma, and the slow, methodical dismantling of the human spirit. The corridors were wrought from cold, black iron, lit by flickering electro-candles that cast long, dancing shadows. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, incense, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. It was a place of whispers and secrets, a mobile prison where the only law was the will of Inquisitor Vask. I was taken to the deep holds, to a section designated the acquisition pens. Here, Vask's collection of resources was kept. I was stripped of my craftsman's robes and given a simple, gray jumpsuit, coarse and stiff against my skin. My cell was a sterile, white cube, featureless save for a narrow cot and a sanitation niche. There were no windows, no personal effects, nothing to mark the passage of time or remind me that I was a person. It was an environment designed to erase the self, to turn a man into a blank slate. My re-education began immediately. It was not a process of learning, but of unlearning. Tutors, silent men and women with the dead eyes of servitors, would enter my cell and subject me to hours of psycho-indoctrination. I was forced to watch flickering picked reels of humanity's enemies. The slavering Xenos, the gibbering mutant, the seductive heretic. These images were paired with painful sonic frequencies and subliminal flashes of imperial dogma. Fear the unknown. Abhor the different. trust only in the authority of the throne. They were attempting to overwrite my natural empathy, my artist's curiosity, with a brutal, simplistic code of hatred and obedience. My mind, the quiet, placid well that Vask had admired, became my only sanctuary. I retreated into it, building palaces of memory from my former life. I would walk the streets of my home city, feel the texture of my carving tools, hear the voices of my clients. I clung to the ghost of Lyran with the desperation of a drowning man, but they were relentless. The indoctrination was followed by sessions with the ship's confessor, a gaunt, fanatical man named Malachi. He did not seek to save my soul. He sought to pulverize it, to break it down so it could be remolded in the image of the imperial creed. Your old life was a sin, he would hiss, his face inches from mine, his breath sour with zeal. Your art was a sin. Your compassion was a weakness, a gateway through which the heretic could enter. You must renounce it. You must despise the man you were. Only in self-hatred can you find the purity to serve. He would force me to recite litanies of penitence for hours, my knees raw on the cold metal floor. I would repeat the words, my voice a hollow echo of his. But in the silence of my mind, I would hold on to my name, Lyran, Lyran, Lyran. It was a mantra of defiance, a secret, desperate prayer. The days bled into one another, an undifferentiated gray fog of indoctrination and interrogation. Food was a nutrient paste, tasteless and gray. Sleep was a shallow, dreamless state, a mere biological necessity. I was being systematically isolated, starved of all sensory and emotional input, save for the carefully curated curriculum of fear and obedience they fed me. I was a crystal being slowly and deliberately scoured of its etheric resonance, prepared for a new, darker engraving. In the pens, I was not alone. There were others, dozens of them, each a resource requisitioned by Vask from some unfortunate corner of the galaxy. We never spoke to one another. Conversation was forbidden. But in the silent moments when we were marched to the refectory or the indoctrination chambers, our eyes would meet. We were a collection of broken things, a menagerie of potential tools. I began to see them as archetypes, as examples of the different paths one could take in this new, terrible life. There was the Zealot, a young man named Kale, a former enforcer from a hive world. He had embraced the indoctrination with a terrifying ferocity. He saw Vask not as a captor, but as a savior. His eyes burned with a convert's fire. He would recite the litanies louder than anyone, his voice filled with a genuine, hateful passion. He looked at the rest of us with contempt, seeing our quiet despair as a sign of weakness, of insufficient faith. He was what Vask wanted us to become, a weapon that believed in its own righteousness. He was a success story in this factory of souls. Then there was the ghost, a woman named Ilara, a psyker of some minor talent, taken from a backwater shrine world. Her gift had been small, an ability to sense the emotions of others. But in the sterile, oppressive environment of the veracity, her empathy had become a curse. She could feel the collective fear and despair of everyone in the pens, a constant, low-level psychic scream that was slowly driving her mad. She was thin and pale, her eyes wide and haunted. She would sometimes flinch at unseen things, her hands pressed to her temples as if to block out a terrible noise. She was a tool that was breaking under the strain of its own function. She was a cautionary tale. And then there was me. I was the observer, the silent one. I did not embrace the new reality like Kale, nor was I visibly breaking like Ilara. I had retreated so far into my own mind that I presented a blank, placid surface to my captors. I obeyed. I recited the litanies. I endured the indoctrination, but I held a secret, inviolable core of myself, hidden away. I was playing a long, quiet game of survival, hoping to outlast the storm, foolishly believing that there might be an after. We were all being shaped on the same anvil, but the metal of our souls reacted differently. Kale was being forged into a sharp, brutal blade. Ilara was cracking, threatening to shatter. And I was being hammered thin, my own substance being beaten out of me, becoming a mirror, reflecting only what my masters wished to see. One day, Alara broke completely. In the middle of an indoctrination session, as the picked thief displayed images of demonic incursion, she began to scream. It was not a human sound. It was a raw, psychic shriek of pure terror, a wave of agony that washed over all of us. The tutors and guards collapsed, clutching their heads. Even Kale staggered, his face pale. The screen shattered, the lights flickered and died. For a moment, there was chaos. Then, Vask was there. She seemed to appear from the shadows, her face an impassive mask. She walked through the psychic storm that buffeted the room as if it were a mild breeze. She stood before the screaming, convulsing Alara, and placed a single, armored hand on her forehead. The screaming stopped. Alara went limp, her eyes rolling back in her head. "A flawed instrument," Vask said, her voice cutting through the ringing silence. "Empathy is a fatal defect in our work. Take her to the null chambers. Her soul will be rendered down to fuel the Geller fields." Two servitors lumbered forward and dragged Alara's catatonic body away. She was no longer a person. She was fuel. A resource that had failed to meet its specifications and was now being recycled. We all watched her go. Kale's face was a mask of righteous certainty. The weak had been purged. My face was a mask of nothing. But inside, the ghost of Lyran trembled. The lesson was clear. There was no after. There was only successful conversion or disposal. And my quiet, internal rebellion was not a strategy for survival. It was just a slower form of suicide. The fate of Alara was a catalyst. It shattered my passive resistance, my foolish hope of merely enduring. I realized that my mental sanctuary was not a fortress. It was a prison of my own making, a place where I was hiding while my captors systematically dismantled the foundations. To survive, I could not simply hide. I had to change. I had to adapt. My quiet defiance had to become something else. I began to study my new environment not as a prisoner, but as a scholar of a new, terrible discipline. The discipline of survival within the Inquisition. I watched Kale, the zealot. I saw how he thrived. He did not fight the indoctrination. He absorbed it, made it his own. He found a new identity in the litanies of hate, a new purpose in the promise of purging the unclean. He was happy, in a terrifying, hollowed-out way. He had replaced the man he had been with the weapon they wanted him to be. It was a form of suicide, but it was a successful one. He had chosen to become the hammer, rather than be the anvil. I began to mimic him. When the litanies were recited, I put a fire in my voice that I did not feel. When the picked thief showed the horrors of the Xenos, I manufactured a look of righteous disgust. I became an actor, playing the part of the perfect acolyte. My talent for emptying my mind, for becoming a vessel, which I had used to commune with the echoes of the dead, was now repurposed. I became a vessel for their ideology. I did not believe it, not in the inviolable core of myself. But I learned to wear the belief like a cloak. My tutors noticed the change. Confessor Malachi's sessions became less about breaking me and more about sharpening me. He saw the fire in my eyes, a fire I had meticulously kindled from the cold embers of my despair, and he mistook it for true faith. I was commended for my progress. I was moved from the general population of the pens to a smaller, more private cell. I was given better rations, books to read heavily, censored theological texts, and tactical manuals, but books nonetheless. I was being groomed. I was moving from raw material to a work in progress. It was a dangerous game. Every day was a performance. Every word, every gesture, was a carefully constructed lie. The strain was immense. At night, in the privacy of my cell, the mask would fall away, and the ghost of Lyran would weep in the silence. The man I was, the quiet craftsman who valued truth and sincerity above all else, was being forced to become a master of deceit. My art, which was about capturing the authentic essence of a soul, had been twisted into the art of projecting a false one. I was betraying everything I had ever been in order to survive. The deepest horror was that, sometimes, the mask would stick. Sometimes, shouting the litanies of hate, a part of me would feel a flicker of the genuine article. The constant exposure to the propaganda, The sheer, relentless pressure of the indoctrination was like a slow-acting acid. It was beginning to eat away at the edges of my true self. The line between Lyran, the prisoner, and the acolyte I was pretending to be started to blur. Who was I really? The terrified man cowering in the dark, or the promising student of hate and dogma who walked the corridors of the veracity by day? The question began to haunt my waking hours. The Inquisition was not just caging my body, it was staging an invasion of my soul. And the terrifying part was, a part of me was beginning to lower the drawbridge. The day came when Inquisitor Vask summoned me to her sanctum. It was the first time I had seen her since my requisition on Cygnus. Her chambers were at the very apex of the ship, a vast, circular room whose domed ceiling was a star chart of the sector, the constellations shifting in slow, silent motion. The air was cold and sterile, smelling of ancient dust, and the faint ozone of powerful cogitator arrays. Books bound in human skin lined the walls, and arcane artifacts hummed with contained power from within stasis fields. It was the heart of the spider's web, and she sat in the center, a patient, ancient predator. She was not in her power armor. She wore simple, black robes, and the cybernetics that riddled her body were more apparent. She looked less like a warrior and more like a scholar monk of some dark, forgotten order. Her glowing green eyes followed me as I approached and knelt on the polished obsidian floor before her. "Subject, indentured, Epsilon grade," she said. Her voice, the same dry whisper I remembered. "Confessor Malachi reports that you have made remarkable progress. He believes your faith is genuine." She paused, letting the statement hang in the cold air. "I do not." I felt a sliver of ice trace its way down my spine. My performance, my carefully constructed lie, had been for nothing. She saw through it all. "Do not be alarmed," she continued, a faint, metallic smile playing on her lips. "Genuine faith is a tool for the masses, for the hammers and the blades. For a tool such as yourself, it is a liability. It clouds the judgment. What I require from you is not faith, but function. Not belief, but a perfect, hollow obedience. Your performance has been excellent. You have demonstrated a capacity for adaptation and dissimulation that far exceeds my initial projections." She rose and glided towards me, her movements silent. "I did not choose you to be another Kale. I have legions of Kales. I chose you for the quality I first observed in your workshop. Your silence, your emptiness. The quality you have been using to lie to me is the very quality I intend to use." She held up a single, gleaming chronocrystal. It was mine, the one she had taken from my workshop, the one that held the memory of the old general. The faint, martial drumbeat pulsed in the quiet room. "You captured the essence of a man without his memories, without his thoughts. You captured his spirit. I require you to do the reverse. I will give you the memories, the thoughts, the sins of a man, and you will become his vessel. You will wear his spirit like a cloak, and you will walk in his footsteps to lead us to his confederates." It was then that I finally, truly understood. All the indoctrination, the litanies, the breaking of my will, it wasn't to make me a believer. It was to make me an empty stage, ready for any actor to play his part. My lie, my pretense of faith, was my final exam, and I had passed. "Your training is over," Vask declared. "Your conditioning is about to begin. You will be remade. You will become my mnemonic scourge. The ghost I send to haunt the guilty." She gestured towards a door I hadn't noticed, a seamless panel in the wall that now hissed open, revealing a chamber that was half Medicae bay, half torture room. Hooded figures, tech priests and chirurgeons, waited within. "The man you were, Lyran the memorialist, was a craftsman of beautiful, useless things," she said, her voice a final, damning verdict. "I will make you into a creator of terrible, necessary truths." I was led into the chamber, my heart a cold, dead stone in my chest. There was no escape. The path I had chosen to survive had led me directly to the altar of my own sacrifice. The conditioning chamber was a place where flesh and soul were treated as interchangeable, malleable materials. It was a testament to the cold, pragmatic cruelty of the Adeptus Mechanicus, pressed into the service of the Inquisition's dark arts. I was strapped to a cold, adamantium slab, my head locked into a halo of gleaming silver needles and psycho-reactive conduits. The air hummed with the energy of forbidden technologies. Inquisitor Vask observed from a glass-walled booth, her face impassive, a scientist watching an experiment. The chief chirurgeon, a man whose face was a patchwork of stitched-together skin and brass plates, approached me. "The vessel must be properly prepared," he rasped, his voice a bubbling wheeze from a vox grill in his throat. "The subject's own memories, the self, are a form of psychic clutter. They will interfere with the purity of the imprint. They must be suppressed, archived, made inaccessible." He adjusted a series of dials on a console next to my head. "We will not erase them entirely. That would cause a catastrophic collapse of the personality architecture. Instead, we will build a labyrinth around them, a prison of neural blocks and mnemonic locks. Your past will become a locked room in your own mind, and you will not have the key." A high-pitched whine filled the room, and a searing, white-hot pain erupted in the center of my brain. It was not a physical pain. It was the pain of being unwritten. I felt my memories, the treasured ghosts of my past, being torn from their moorings. The image of my mother's face, the feeling of my workshop's door handle, the taste of the fruit from my homeworld's orchards. They were all ripped away, receding down long, dark corridors of the mind, doors slamming shut behind them. I fought. I clung to my name, Lyran, the last bastion of my identity. But the machine was relentless. It was a psychic bulldozer, plowing my identity into a deep, dark cellar of my own consciousness. I screamed, but no sound came out. My body was paralyzed, but my mind was a battlefield where my entire existence was being conquered, occupied, and put under martial law. When the process was over, there was a profound silence in my head. An emptiness. A vast, echoing void where my life used to be. I knew, intellectually, that I had a past, but I could not access it. It was a book I knew I had read, but whose contents were now a complete blank. The chirurgeon seemed pleased. "The vessel is prepared," he announced. "The psychic space has been cleared. We may now begin the first imprinting." A servitor approached, carrying a crystal matrix, far larger and more complex than any I had ever created. It glowed with a sick, purple light, and pulsed with a chaotic, malevolent energy. "This is the mnemocortex of the heretic Viridian," Vask's voice announced over an intercom, cold and clinical. "Leader of the Culling Blade cult on Hesperus 4. He was killed during a raid, but his network of co-conspirators remains active. His memories are our only map. You will be our guide." They lowered the glowing crystal into a socket in the halo above my head. The connection was made, and the dead man came flooding in. It was not a gentle echo, like the ones I had worked with. It was a tidal wave of filth, a lifetime of paranoia, hatred, and blasphemous devotion to a dark god poured into the empty spaces of my mind. I felt his ambition. I felt his rage at the Imperium. I felt the ecstatic, horrific joy he took in ritual murder. I saw through his eyes, felt with his skin. I was in his temple, chanting his prayers. I was in his bed, with his mistress. I was slitting the throat of a loyalist citizen, and I was enjoying it. The man I had been, Lyran, would have been shattered by the sheer evil of it. But Lyran was gone, locked away. The empty vessel that remained simply accepted it. Viridian's memories became my memories. His life became my life. I was no longer an empty room. I was a haunted house. And the ghost was now the master. When they finally unstrapped me, I looked down at my hands, and for a terrifying second, I did not recognize them. They were not the hands of a craftsman. They were the hands of a murderer, a heretic, and now they were mine. The integration was a period of profound, terrifying dislocation. I was two people in one body, a constant, silent war being waged in the confines of my skull. The empty, hollowed-out acolyte was the host, the conscious mind. But Viridian, the dead heretic, was a phantom limb that constantly twitched with its own desires and impulses. His memories were not passive files to be browsed. They were active, aggressive. I would be walking to the refectory and suddenly be overwhelmed by a wave of Viridian's paranoia, my eyes scanning the shadows for assassins. I would be eating my nutrient paste, and my tongue would remember the taste of spiced wine from a feast celebrating a successful terror attack. At night, I did not dream my own dreams. I dreamed his. I relived his blasphemous rituals, his whispered conspiracies, his violent rages. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the phantom sensation of blood on my hands. Inquisitor Vask and her chirurgeons monitored my condition with detached, clinical interest. They put me through a series of tests, probing the veracity of the memories, my ability to access them on command. "Where did you hide the cache of psych-reactive explosives?" a chirurgeon would ask. And without thinking, the answer would come to my lips, in a voice that was mine but with an inflection that was Viridian's. "Beneath the altar of St. Josmain's shrine, in the sub-sector administrative dome, I knew things I had never learned. I could speak a dialect of Low Gothic I had never heard. I understood the intricacies of a chaotic doctrine that should have driven me mad. I was becoming an expert in my own damnation. Kale, the zealot, was brought in to observe me. He was now a full-fledged interrogator in Vask's retinue, his faith forged into a weapon. He looked at me with a mixture of fascination and disgust. He saw me as a necessary evil, a tainted tool. "It lives in you," he once sneered, during a debriefing. "The taint of the arch-enemy, can you feel it trying to consume you? You must fight it. You must use its filth to serve the Emperor, but never forget that you are unclean." He did not understand. There was no fighting it. Viridian was not a separate entity I could wrestle with. He was a part of my mental architecture now. His memories were cross-referenced with my own blankness. His emotions were wired into my nervous system. To fight him would be to fight myself. The only way forward was to become him, to think as he thought, to feel as he felt, to understand his motivations so deeply that I could predict what his living allies would do next. It was the ultimate act of empathy, the very quality they had tried to beat out of me, now repurposed for this monstrous task. I had to empathize with a monster, to crawl inside his skin, to see the universe through his hate-filled eyes. The training I had undergone as a memorialist, the art of listening to the whispers of a soul, had reached its dark apotheosis. I was no longer listening to a faint echo. I was having a full-blown conversation with a ghost, and the ghost was winning. Vask was pleased with my progress. "Excellent," she declared after a particularly successful debriefing where I had outlined the entire command structure of Viridian's cult. "The integration is stabilizing. The tool is ready to be deployed." They gave me new clothes, not the gray jumpsuit of a prisoner, but the dark, functional body glove and armored coat of an inquisitorial agent. They gave me a weapon, a sleek las pistol that felt alien and heavy in my hand. Viridian's memories knew how to use it. Lyran's soul recoiled from its cold, deadly purpose. I looked at my reflection in a polished bulkhead. The face was mine, but the eyes were different. They were older, colder. They held the knowledge of things no sane man should ever know. I was no longer Lyran, the artist. I was no longer the empty acolyte. I was something new, a chimera, a man who wore a dead heretic's soul, and I was being sent to hunt him. My first mission as the mnemonic scourge took me to Hesperus 4, the world Viridian had terrorized. Stepping out of the shuttle onto the soot-stained permacrete of the main spaceport was a profoundly disorienting experience. For the acolyte, this was a new world. For Viridian, whose memories churned within me, it was home. I knew these streets. I recognized the acrid smell of the hive's smog. I felt a phantom pang of nostalgia for a life I had not lived. I was assigned to a team of inquisitorial stormtroopers, led by Interrogator Kale. He was to be my handler, my guard, the one who would put a bolt in my head if the heretic's personality threatened to overwhelm my own. His presence was a constant, judgmental weight. "The target is a man named Jorich." Kale briefed me in the back of the armored transport, his voice clipped and businesslike. "He was Viridian's second in command, the cult's chief enforcer. He has gone to ground since Viridian's death. The local arbites have no leads. You are our only lead." He looked at me, his eyes cold. Viridian trusted him. Where would he go? The question was a key, unlocking a flood of memories. I closed my eyes and let the ghost take over. I was standing with Jorich in a noisy underhive bar, the air thick with smoke and cheap amasec. We were celebrating a successful bombing. Jorich was laughing, a great booming sound. He clapped me on the back. "If the worst ever happens, boss," he slurred, his voice thick with drink and devotion, "I'll be at the old place, the place where we first took the oath. They'll never find me there." The memory was so vivid I could almost taste the amasec. I opened my eyes. "The Silent Saint Distillery," I said, my voice hoarse. "An abandoned factory in the sump. They used it for their initial induction rituals." Kale stared at me, a flicker of grudging respect warring with his disgust. "Are you certain?" "Viridian is," I replied. The drive to the sump was a journey through my borrowed past. I recognized landmarks from Viridian's memories. A hab block where he had a safe house. A street corner where he'd executed an informant. A food stall that sold the synth noodles he had favored. Each recognition was a small, sharp stab of psychic dissonance. I was a tourist in a dead man's life. The stormtroopers were silent, their faces hidden behind their helmets. To them, I was some kind of sanctioned witch, a creature of ill omen. Kale sat opposite me, his hand never far from the bolt pistol at his hip. He was watching me, looking for any sign of weakness, any hint that the heretic was taking control. He did not realize that for me to function, I had to let the heretic take control. Just a little. I had to walk the knife's edge between being the vessel and being the man whose memories I carried. The transport ground to a halt. We had arrived. The Silent Saint Distillery was a hulking ruin, a cathedral of rust and decay. "He is here," I whispered, and it was Viridian's certainty I felt. "He is waiting." Kale nodded to his men. "Secure the perimeter. The asset and I will make the approach." He turned to me, his face grim. "Follow my lead. Do exactly as I say. And try not to get us both killed by the monster in your head." We entered the distillery through a collapsed wall, our boots crunching on broken glass and crystallized filth. The air was stagnant, thick with the ghosts of forgotten industry. The place was a maze of rusted vats and catwalks, shrouded in deep shadows. Viridian's memories painted a different picture for me. I saw this place alive, filled with hooded figures chanting in the flickering light of forbidden candles. I felt a phantom echo of the religious fervor that had once filled these halls. It was a holy place, to a man I was supposed to be hunting. Kale moved with the practiced silence of a predator, his bolt pistol sweeping every corner. I followed, my own last pistol feeling clumsy and unnatural in my grip. My tactical advantage was not skill with a weapon, but the map of this place that existed in my head, courtesy of my passenger. "He'll have set up a kill zone near the main distilling vat," I whispered to Kale, the information surfacing unbidden. "It offers the best field of fire." Kale gave me a sharp look, then nodded, changing his approach. We were a strange, dysfunctional team, the zealot and the haunted, the hunter and his ghost hound. We found Jorich exactly where Viridian knew he would be. He was holed up behind a rusted piece of machinery, a heavy stubber resting on a makeshift barricade. He was a big man, his face a roadmap of scars, his eyes burning with a cornered animal's desperation and a fanatic's faith. "Kale," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the vast space. I should have known the corpse emperor's lackeys would send his most brainwashed dog. He had not seen me yet. I was still in the shadows. "Surrender, Jorich," Kale called out, his voice flat and commanding. "Your master is dead. Your cult is broken. There is nowhere left for you to run." Jorich laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Viridian is not dead. He has ascended. He will return to lead us." "You cannot understand faith like ours, puppet." This was my moment. Vask's voice echoed in my memory of my conditioning. "You will be a key. You will unlock the minds of your enemies." I stepped out of the shadows. Jorich's eyes widened in shock, his jaw dropping. He was not seeing an inquisitorial acolyte. He was seeing a ghost. He was seeing his master. I did not speak. I simply raised my hand in a gesture that was not mine, a specific pattern of finger movements that was a secret sign of recognition within the cult's inner circle. It was a piece of knowledge so intimate, so secret, that only Viridian could have known it. Jorik's face, a mask of hard-bitten defiance a moment before, crumpled. Doubt, confusion, and a terrible, dawning hope washed over him. "Master," he whispered, his voice trembling. Is it really you?" Kale stared at me, his eyes wide with a horrified understanding of what I was doing. This was not interrogation. This was psychological warfare of the cruelest, most intimate kind. I was using a dead man's love and loyalty as a weapon against his friend. I felt a wave of Viridian's own affection for this man, a genuine warmth for his most loyal soldier. And at the same time, I felt the cold, calculating purpose of the acolyte, the tool of the Inquisition. The two sensations warred within me, creating a nauseating psychic friction. "Jorik," I said, and the voice that came out was a perfect imitation of Viridian's, a gravelly, charismatic baritone I had only heard in memories. "Lay down your weapon, my friend. It is over." "I have returned." For a moment, he believed. His faith, his desperation, his love for his master, it was stronger than his reason. His hands loosened on the heavy stubber. He started to stand, a look of ecstatic revelation on his face. And in that moment of hesitation, Kale fired. The bolt round took Jorik in the chest, the explosive shell detonating with a wet, final crack. He was thrown backwards, his eyes wide with a look of ultimate betrayal, fixed on me. On the face of the master he thought had returned only to deceive him. He died, not cursing the Inquisition, but with a question in his eyes. He died with his faith shattered, his soul poisoned by my lie. The echo of the gunshot faded, leaving a ringing silence. Kale walked over to the body, his face grim. He looked at me, and his usual contempt was replaced by something else, a kind of fear. "The Emperor's work is done," he said, his voice quiet. But I could see it in his eyes. He was not sure which emperor we were serving in that moment. I looked at the corpse of the man I had helped to kill, a man whose loyalty I had twisted into a fatal vulnerability. I felt the ghost of Viridian inside me, silent for the first time. Not raging, not screaming, just mourning. And for the first time since my transformation began, I felt a flicker of something that was truly my own. A profound, soul-deep sense of self-loathing. I had not just killed a man, I had murdered his faith. And in doing so, I had taken another step towards becoming the monster they wanted me to be. The mission was deemed a success. Jorik's death led us to a data slate in his possession, which in turn led to the swift and brutal roll-up of the entire Culling Blade cult on Hesperus IV. The Inquisition's machine of justice ground them to dust. Kale's report to Inquisitor Vask praised my unorthodox but effective methods. I was commended for my flawless inhabitation of the heretical persona. They called it a victory. To me, it felt like a profound and personal defeat. The ghost of Viridian retreated after Jorik's death, becoming a sullen, quiet presence in the back of my mind. The raw, aggressive emotions were gone, replaced by a deep, melancholic echo of his grief and betrayal. It was, in some ways, worse. The rage had been a fire that I could observe. The sorrow was a cold, seeping dampness that seemed to permeate my own hollow soul. I had not just used his memories, I had participated in them, added a final, terrible chapter to his story. Back on the Veracity, I was granted a period of psychic cleansing. This was not for my benefit, but for the maintenance of the tool. I was placed in a sensory deprivation tank, flooded with calming, amnesiac chemicals and low-level telepathic pulses designed to separate my consciousness from the memory imprint. It was supposed to be a reset, a way to re-establish the barrier between the acolyte and the ghost. But it was like trying to separate ink from water. Viridian was a part of me now. The cleansing only served to highlight the pieces of him that remained, like bloodstains on a scrubbed floor. They could dull the memories, but they could not erase the experience. I could still feel the phantom weight of Jorik's betrayed gaze. That was my memory now, not his. During this period, I was largely isolated, but I saw Kale once in the ship's corridors. The dynamic between us had shifted. His contempt was gone, replaced by a wary distance. He looked at me as one might look at a caged beast, that has proven to be more intelligent and dangerous than previously thought. He no longer saw me as a tainted, pathetic creature. He saw me as a weapon that was perhaps too sharp, too strange to be trusted. He was a man of the bolt gun and the pyre. His methods were clean, direct, brutal. My methods were insidious. I had not defeated Jorich with faith or firepower. I had defeated him with a lie wrapped in love. I had poisoned him from the inside out. To a zealot like Kale, this was a necessary but unclean form of warfare. He was a butcher. I was a vivisectionist, and my work had unsettled him. It had also unsettled me. The ghost of Lyran, the man who believed in the sanctity of the soul's echo, was horrified by what I had done. I had taken the most sacred things a person possesses, their love, their loyalty, their faith, and I had forged them into a weapon of betrayal. The craftsman who had once soothed grief had now learned to weaponize it. Inquisitor Vask summoned me once more to her sanctum when the cleansing was complete. She reviewed the mission logs, her glowing eyes scanning streams of data I could not see. The asset performed within expected parameters, she stated, as if discussing the performance of a cogitator. The Viridian personality matrix is now considered dormant. It will be archived in situ. The vessel is ready for its next imprinting. My heart grew cold. This was to be my life then. A series of psychic deaths and rebirths. An endless cycle of becoming a monster to hunt a monster, only to be wiped clean and have a new monster poured into the void. Each time, a little more of the original vessel would be eroded. A little more of the taint would remain. I was a reusable canvas for the art of damnation. Your next assignment will be the memories of the psyker witch Anne Sine, whose coven on Mara's world is proving elusive, Vask said, already moving on. The Viridian affair, a closed file. Her mind is said to be a labyrinth of madness and deceit. It will be a significant challenge for your conditioning. I knelt before her, the perfect, obedient tool. I said nothing. But in the silent, empty spaces of my mind, a question began to form. A cold, heretical question that had nothing to do with the gods of chaos or the lies of the Xenos. What was the difference between what she was doing to me and what the heretics did to their victims? She was invading a mind, twisting a soul, destroying a person's identity to serve her own ends. Her methods were just more clinical, more efficient. Her cause was sanctioned, holy. But the act itself, the violation, was the same. I was a victim of a process that was indistinguishable from the evil it was meant to fight, and I was her willing accomplice. The thought was a sliver of ice in the void, a tiny, rebellious spark of the man who used to be Lyran. The man who saw a truth he wasn't supposed to see. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this thought, this quiet, internal heresy, was far more dangerous than any ghost they could ever implant in my mind. The imprinting of Anai's sign, the psyker witch, was a descent into a different kind of hell. Viridian's mind had been a fortress of hate and paranoia, but it was structurally sound. It had walls, corridors, a twisted but coherent logic. Aeneas's mind was a storm, a maelstrom of raw, untamed psychic energy, of fractured thoughts and sensory overload. To enter her memories was to be cast adrift on a sea of madness. Her life had not been a linear progression of events, but a chaotic explosion of visions, whispers from the warp, and moments of ecstatic, terrifying connection to the things that lurk beyond the veil. When they poured her into me, I did not just receive her memories. I received her madness. My world dissolved. The cold, sterile reality of the veracity was overlaid with a shimmering, ethereal film of unreality. I would see patterns in the way the dust motes danced in a beam of light. I would hear voices whispering from the hum of the ship's engines. I felt the emotional states of the crew as colors, auras of dull gray obedience, spikes of red anger from the enforcers, and the cold, black void that was Inquisitor Vask. The ghost of Lyran, the man who was sensitive to the echoes of the soul, was both horrified and fascinated. This was the dark side of his own talent, magnified 1,000 times. Where he had listened to the gentle whispers of the departed, she had communed with the roaring chorus of the damned. My conditioning was pushed to its limits. The chirurgeons had to install psychic baffles and governors directly into my cerebral cortex, a painful, invasive surgery, just to keep me from descending into a permanent state of psychosis. The experience changed me in a fundamental way. Viridian had made me a heretic. Anais made me a witch. I learned to navigate the currents of her madness, to find the islands of coherent memory in the ocean of chaos. She had been the leader of a Tsientian coven, worshippers of the changer of ways. Their heresy was not one of hate, but of knowledge. They sought to unravel the secrets of fate, to gaze upon the threads of destiny and reweave them to their own design. And in her memories, I saw things that a sane mind should not see. I saw glimpses of possible futures, like shards of a shattered mirror, each one showing a different, terrible outcome. I saw the truth of the Imperium not as a political or historical entity, but as a great, calcified structure of belief, a psychic bastion against a tide of chaos that was both holding the darkness at bay and stagnating into its own form of damnation. The most terrifying part was that some of what she believed resonated with the secret, heretical thought I had already had. She saw the Inquisition as just another player in the great game, a force of order so extreme it became its own kind of chaos. She saw the God Emperor not as a benevolent father, but as a psychic vortex, a dead god whose corpse screams held the fabric of reality together, a necessary prison for humanity. These were not just her memories, they were her revelations. And they were seeping into me, poisoning the well, reinforcing my own growing, secret doubt. This mission would be different. With Viridian, I was hunting a man. With Anais, I was hunting an idea. And the idea was infectious. Cale was assigned as my handler again, and his discomfort with me had grown into a palpable aura of distrust. He was a man of black and white, of absolute certainty. I had become a creature of shades and ambiguities. He would ask me a question about the coven's location, and I would answer with a riddle I had learned from Anais's whispers. They hide where the past and future meet, I would say, my voice strange and distant. It would take Cale hours of painstaking, literal-minded detective work to figure out that I meant an old, abandoned chronometer factory in the upper hive. I was no longer a simple map. I was an oracle, a cryptic, unreliable source of tainted information, and Cale hated it. He hated the uncertainty. He hated the way I looked at him sometimes, as if I could see the threads of his own fate. "Stop it," he once snarled at me after I had stared at him for a long, silent moment. "Stop looking at me with her eyes." I had not even realized I was doing it. The line between me and the ghost was eroding faster this time. Anais was not a passenger. She was a co-pilot, her hands grasping for the controls. And a part of me, the part that was desperate for any truth, for any explanation for the senseless cruelty of the galaxy, was starting to let her steer. The hunt for Anais Sign's coven on Mara's world was a game of shadows and riddles. We were not kicking down doors and engaging in firefights. We were following a trail of whispers, of synchronicity, of impossible coincidences. Cale's straightforward, brutal methods were useless here. He was a creature of the material world, and this was a war for the soul of it. He needed me, and the knowledge of his dependence was a source of constant friction between us. My role was to interpret the madness. I would meditate for hours, letting Anais's fractured consciousness wash over me, sifting through the chaos for patterns, for clues. I would see a vision of a bird with silver wings falling from a broken clock tower, and from that, I would have to deduce the name of a tavern, the Silver Plume, on a street called Bellwether's Rise. It was exhausting, maddening work. I felt my own sanity fraying at the edges, the distinction between my thoughts, Anais's thoughts, and the whispers of the warp becoming dangerously thin. We moved through the polite, upper echelons of the planet society. Anais's coven was not made up of gibbering underhive mutants. Its members were poets, artists, scholars, and nobles, the very kind of people who had been purged on my own homeworld. They were driven by a thirst for knowledge, a desire to see beyond the veil of imperial dogma. They were heretics, yes, but they were not monsters. They were people. People who had made a different choice. This was a profoundly dangerous realization. The indoctrination had taught me to see the heretic as an inhuman other, a cancer to be excised. But through Anais's memories, I felt her affection for her followers. I understood their motivations. I saw their humanity, and it made my mission feel less like a righteous purge and more like a political assassination. The turning point came when Aeneas's memories led us to a library, a secret, forbidden archive of books and scrolls that had been deemed heretical and ordered destroyed centuries ago. The Coven had preserved them. It was their holiest place. As I stepped into the dusty, quiet space, the ghost of Lyran, the archivist, the lover of knowledge, stirred for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The smell of old parchment, the sight of handwritten script, it was a ghost of my own past. And I realized that the Coven's crime was the same as my own original, forgotten sin. They had sought out a truth that the system did not want them to know. They had prioritized knowledge over obedience. I was hunting myself. The realization was a physical blow. I staggered, leaning against a bookshelf for support. Kale rushed to my side, thinking it was a psychic attack. "What is it?" he demanded. "What do you see?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I think he saw not the acolyte, not the scourge, not Aeneas's ghost, but a flicker of the man I had once been. A man in profound existential pain. "They are looking for a book," I managed to say, the information coming from Aeneas's memories, but the words colored by my own dawning horror. A book called the Ordos Hereticus. It is said to contain a true, unexpurgated history of the sector's founding, a history that contradicts the official imperial record. It was my story, all over again. A different planet, a different lie, but the same essential crime. And the same inevitable punishment. I was the punishment. I was the redaction, sent to burn the library and its librarians. Kale's eyes narrowed. He did not understand the personal dimension of my distress, but he understood the threat. "Where is this book? Where are they?" Aeneas's memories provided the answer. A secret chamber, behind a false bookshelf. They would be there, communing with their forbidden knowledge. We had found them. And I had to lead the wolves to the door of a group of people whose only crime was the one I had been condemned for. The irony was a perfect, closed circle, and it was crushing me under its weight. The raid was quiet and swift. Kale's stormtroopers moved with lethal efficiency, securing the library's exits. He and I went to the secret chamber alone. He wanted no witnesses to my strange, psychic arts. The door swung open to reveal the Coven, a dozen men and women, gathered in a circle around a single, ancient tome resting on a lectern. They were not chanting or performing some vile ritual. They were reading, listening as one of their number recited a passage from the Ordos Hereticus. They looked up as we entered, their faces a mixture of fear and a strange, serene resignation. They had seen this coming in their divinations. They had known their quest for knowledge would end this way. Aeneas's successor, a woman with the same haunted, intelligent eyes I had seen in the memories, met my gaze. She did not see Kale, the obvious threat. She saw me. Her psychic senses recognized the ghost I wore. "Sister?" she whispered, her voice filled with a confused, painful hope. "You have returned to us." Kale raised his bolt pistol. "In the name of the Emperor and the Holy Ordos of the Inquisition, you are all condemned as heretics. Your lives are forfeit." The cultists did not beg. They did not fight. They simply looked at me, at the woman they thought was their returned leader, their eyes full of questions. This was Jorik all over again, but a dozen times worse. I was not just a tool of betrayal. I was a desecration, a walking blasphemy against their faith. I had become the thing I was hunting, a vessel for a power I did not control, a puppet of a greater, hidden will. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The years of conditioning, the layers of indoctrination, the ghosts of Viridian and Aeneas, the silent, screaming ghost of Lyran, it all crashed together in a perfect storm of existential horror. And a new, terrible thought emerged. A choice. I did not have to be the tool. I did not have to be the weapon. The psychic governors in my head were straining under the onslaught of Aeneas's madness and my own turmoil. For the first time, I felt a flicker of my own power. The passive sensitivity of Lyran, amplified by the raw, untamed might of the witch ghost I wore. I could do something. I could break the cycle. I looked at Kale. I looked at the condemned scholars, and I made a decision. I reached out, not with my hands, but with my mind, with the combined power of the acolyte, the witch, and the memorialist. I did not attack Kale. I did not attack the cultists. I attacked the book. The Logos Historica, the source of the heresy, the symbol of the forbidden truth. A wave of pure psychic force, a scream of negation, erupted from me. The ancient book on its lectern burst into blue flame, its pages turning instantly to black ash. It was an act of ultimate betrayal to both sides. I had destroyed the heretic's holy relic, and I had destroyed the evidence that Kale needed for his purge. I had erased the truth, the very crime I had been punished for. I now committed willingly, on a grand scale. The cultists cried out in despair. Kale stared in shock. And then I collapsed, the psychic backlash overwhelming my senses, plunging me into a welcome darkness. It was my first true act of free will since my capture, and it was an act of pure, nihilistic destruction. I had not chosen a side. I had chosen to burn the entire board. I awoke in the Medicae bay of the veracity, my head throbbing with a pain that was more spiritual than physical. The psychic governors had been fried. My mind was a raw, open wound, Ananias's madness and my own despair bleeding together. Inquisitor Vask was there, standing over my cot. Her face, for the first time, was not impassive. There was a flicker of something in her glowing green eyes. Anger? Disappointment? Or was it interest? "You exceeded your operational parameters, subject," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You destroyed the primary evidence and compromised the integrity of the Anne sign imprint." Kale stood behind her, his face a grim, stony mask. His report must have been a masterpiece of confusion. "The heretics have been contained," Vask continued, "but your actions were a failure, a deviation, a flaw in the tool. I expected to be decommissioned, to be sent to the null chambers like Alara, my soul rendered down for fuel. It would have been a mercy. However," Vask said, her strange, metallic smile returning, "it was also instructive. You demonstrated an unexpected capacity, a synthesis. You did not act as the acolyte. You did not act as the witch. You acted as yourself, a self that is a fusion of all the parts we have given you." She seemed almost pleased. "You have become something new, not a vessel, but a crucible, a place where these personalities are not just housed, but are reforged into something else, something useful." My act of rebellion had not been a rebellion at all. It had just been the next, unforeseen stage of my development. In their eyes, I hadn't broken the rules. I had written a new one. I was no longer just a library of dead men's sins. I was becoming a composite being, an entity forged from the psychic wreckage of others. "The Anne sign imprint is too damaged to be of further use," Vask stated. "We will purge it. But the damage to your own psyche is extensive. Yourself, your new emergent self, has been wounded. It requires reinforcement." I did not understand. Reinforcement? What could they possibly do to me now? "We have recovered your original memory archives," the chirurgeon's wheezing voice said from the shadows. "The ones we placed behind the mnemonic locks. The life of the memorialist, Lyran." A cold dread, colder than any fear I had felt before, washed over me. "To stabilize the emergent personality, we will reintegrate a portion of your original self," the chirurgeon explained. "It will act as an anchor, a foundation upon which to build the new entity. It will give you a core of identity to prevent total psychic collapse." They were going to give me back my past. They were going to give me back Lyran, not out of mercy, not as a reward, but as a tool, as a software patch to fix the broken machine. They were going to take the last, pure, inviolable thing I had, the ghost of the man I had been, and they were going to weave him into the fabric of the monster I had become. It was the ultimate violation. They were not just content with using my present and future. Now they were going to weaponize my past. They were going to make the man who hated the monster complicit in its existence. They were going to force Lyran to become the foundation for the mnemonic scourge. "Prepare the subject for mnemonic reintegration," Vask commanded. I could not fight. I was too weak. As they lowered the halo of needles towards my head once more, I could only weep, not for the pain to come, but for the beautiful, tragic ghost of Lyrane, the quiet craftsman, whose memory was about to be desecrated in the most intimate way imaginable. He was finally coming home, and his home was now a haunted house, filled with monsters. And he was about to become one of them. The reintegration of my own past was the most subtle and profound torture I had yet endured. It was not a violent flood, like the imprinting of the heretics. It was a slow, gentle rain of memories, seeping back into the barren landscape of my mind. And every drop was agony. I remembered the sun on my face, on Cygnus X1. The memory was beautiful, and it was painful because I knew that sun was now a cold, dead cinder in a black sky. I remembered the face of a childhood friend, and the memory was poisoned by the knowledge that he had been purged, his body burned on a pyre. I remembered the feeling of completing a perfect chrono crystal, the sense of peace and rightness in my work. And that memory was tainted by the grotesque parody my work had become. They did not give me back my life. They gave me back a catalog of my losses. They gave me back the full, crushing weight of my own tragedy. And as the chirurgeon had predicted, it worked. The emergent personality, the fractured, traumatized thing that was the me of the now, stabilized. The ghost of Lyrane was no longer a secret hidden prisoner. He was now a conscious part of the whole. He was the part that felt the sorrow. He was the part that understood the depth of the fall. He was the weeping observer, now chained to the front of the stage, forced to watch the play. The I that existed now was a trinity. Lyrane, the source of my pain and my conscience. The acolyte, the hollowed-out shell of obedience and function. And the scourge, the composite entity, the repository of dead men's sins and the wielder of their dark knowledge. I was a man at war with himself, on 3 fronts. Vask considered the procedure a resounding success. I was more stable, more coherent. My reports were more lucid. The madness of Anais was gone, replaced by a deep, functional melancholy. I was a better tool. A sadder, more broken man, but a much, much better tool. My work continued. New ghosts were poured into me. A traitorous naval officer, a mutant demagogue, a rogue astropath. With each one, the trinity inside me adapted. Lyrane grieved for the perversion of my soul. The acolyte processed the data and obeyed the orders. And the scourge, the emergent I, learned to use the new memories, the new skills, the new sins, adding them to its terrible arsenal. I became Vask's finest agent. I could walk into a room and, using the paranoia of a dead conspirator, spot the subtle signs of deceit in a suspect's posture. I could listen to a coded transmission and, using the knowledge of a dead cryptographer, unravel its meaning. I could look at a crime scene and, using the predatory instincts of a dead murderer, see the patterns of violence that others missed. I was a master detective, my expertise purchased with the currency of 1,000 psychic deaths, including my own. My relationship with Kale became one of cold, professional symbiosis. He was the sword, and I was the scalpel. He still hated what I was, but he respected the results I produced. We were a terribly effective team, the zealot and the damned, bringing the Emperor's brutal peace to the dark corners of the galaxy. But with every mission, with every soul I dissected, the part of me that was Lyrane grew weaker, more translucent. His sorrow was becoming a constant, background hum, the baseline emotional state of my existence. He was the price of my stability. His eternal, conscious grief was the anchor that kept the whole monstrous edifice from collapsing. I was powered by my own sorrow, fueled by my own despair, a self-sustaining engine of misery and function. This was the genius of Vask's design. She had not just made me a tool, she had made my very soul the schematics for its own eternal maintenance. Years turned into decades. In the timeless void of space, aboard the Veracity, my body aged slowly, its decay held at bay by inquisitorial juvenat treatments. But my soul felt ancient, worn thin by the friction of 100 stolen lives. I was a fixture in Vask's retinue, a legendary, whispered-about figure, the acolyte who wore dead men's faces, the ghost who hunted for the throne. I had served on worlds burned by war, in hives choked by intrigue, and on ships lost to the silent horrors of the void. I had unraveled conspiracies that could have toppled sectors and exposed heresies that festered in the highest echelons of power. I had done great and terrible things in the service of the Imperium. I had saved billions of lives by sacrificing my own soul, over and over again. Did it matter? Was there a cosmic ledger where my deeds were weighed against my damnation? I no longer believed so. Such thoughts were the domain of men like Kale, who still saw the universe in terms of sin and salvation. I saw it now as a machine, a vast, pitiless, grinding machine, and my only function was to be one of its components. I saw Inquisitor Vask less and less. She was ancient when I met her. Now she was a creature of pure artifice, her consciousness bound to the command throne of her ship, her will executed by proxies like me and Kale. She had become a part of the machine herself, a ghost of a different sort. Kale, too, had changed. The fire of his youth had cooled into the hard, gray embers of a veteran's certainty. He was now a full inquisitor in his own right, though he still often chose to work alongside me. Our dysfunctional partnership had become a strange, unspoken bond. He did not understand me, and he never would, but he trusted me. He trusted the results I brought. He was the anchor to the material world that I sometimes needed, and I was the key to the labyrinth of the human soul that he could never hope to navigate. We were two sides of the same tarnished coin. One day, we found ourselves on a dead world, investigating the echoes of a cult that had been wiped out centuries ago. It was a routine mission, a cold case that Vask, in her infinite, patient paranoia, wanted closed. The world had been subject to exterminatus. The atmosphere was a toxic soup, the ground a sheet of black, volcanic glass. We moved through the ruins in heavy, sealed environment suits. There was nothing here, nothing but ghosts and radiation. And yet, I felt something, a resonance, a faint psychic echo, so much weaker than the brutal imprints I was used to, but familiar. It was like the echoes I had worked with, so long ago, the echoes of my first life. I followed the feeling, drawn by an instinct I thought had been burned out of me. Kale followed me, curious, trusting my strange senses. The echo led us to a cave, deep beneath the glassy surface of the planet, a place that had been shielded from the worst of the apocalyptic fires. Inside, we found them. Chrono crystals, hundreds of them, arranged on shelves carved into the rock. They were crude, imperfect compared to the art of my homeworld, but they were unmistakably the same craft. This cult, this long-dead coven of heretics, had been memorialists. They had been preserving the souls of their fallen. I reached out and touched one. It was cold, its light long since extinguished, but the ghost of Lyran within me could still feel the faintest trace of what it had held. The memory of a child's laughter. What is this place? Kale's voice, tinny over the suit's vox, was filled with confusion. A library, I said, my own voice cracking with an emotion I had not felt in a century. It was my own. It was grief. This was a library of souls. I looked at the dead crystals, the last remnants of a people who had practiced my own forbidden art. And in that moment, the trinity within me, Lyran, the acolyte, the scourge, all fell silent. And there was only me. A man looking at the wreckage of his own past, mirrored on a dead world a galaxy away from his home. The heretics had not been worshipping dark gods. They had been trying to remember. Their crime was not blasphemy. Their crime was memory. And I, the man whose memory had been taken and turned into a weapon, was the last person alive who could understand them. Kale saw my distress. He saw the profound, shuddering reaction I was having to this cave of dead crystals. He was a zealot, but he was not a fool. He knew this place touched something deep and broken within me. "What is this, Lyran?" he asked, using my name for the first time in decades. The sound of it, after so long, was a physical blow. It was a name that belonged to a ghost, and the ghost was now standing in its own graveyard. "This was my life," I told him. My voice was a whisper over the vox. "Before Vask, before all of this is what I did. I was a memorialist. I explained the craft, the art of it, the sacred trust. I told him of my homeworld, Cygnus X1, and how my people had been purged for this very practice. He listened in silence, his helmet hiding his expression. I was confessing my original sin to the man who had been my jailer for 100 years. When I was finished, there was a long silence, filled only by the hiss of our suit's recyclers. "It was heresy," Cale said finally, but his voice lacked its usual iron conviction. It was the rote response of a man whose certainty had been shaken. "The unsanctioned trafficking of souls. It is forbidden." "Is it?" I asked, and the voice was Lyran's, full of a sorrowful fire. "We brought comfort to the grieving. We honored the dead. We did not worship them. We did not bargain with them. We simply remembered them." "What is the heresy in that? What is the crime in remembering?" I pointed to the rows of dead crystals. These people, whoever they were doing the same. They were fighting to hold on to the people they had lost. In a galaxy that demands we forget, that demands we become faceless cogs in the machine, their crime was to insist that individual lives mattered, that a single soul was worth remembering. Cale had no answer. His entire life, his entire faith, was built on the foundation that the individual did not matter, that only the whole, the Imperium, had value. I was presenting him with a truth his ideology could not compute. My own life was the proof. I had been an individual. They had erased me and turned me into a function for the good of the whole, and the process had been a living damnation. "We are all heretics, Cale," I said, the terrible, simple truth of it falling into the silence between us. "You, for your blind faith in a system that is as cruel and capricious as any chaos god. And me, for knowing it, and for serving it anyway." I sank to my knees amidst the dead memories of a lost people, the carefully constructed persona of the mnemonic scourge, the stable, functional tool, had shattered. The grief of Lyran, the cold obedience of the acolyte, the borrowed sins of the scourge, they all bled together into a single, profound wave of despair. The mission was a failure. There was no cult to hunt. There was only this dead end, this cave of mirrors that had shown me the truth of my own reflection. I was a tool designed to punish a crime that I was the living embodiment of. My entire existence was a paradox, a piece of cosmic, grimdark irony, and I could not bear the weight of it any longer. I looked at Cale, my old jailer, my reluctant partner. "Kill me," I whispered over the vox. "End it. It's the only mercy left." Cale looked at me, then at the cave of dead souls, then back at me. He raised his bolt pistol, and for the first time in his life, the zealot, the man of absolute certainty, hesitated. Cale did not shoot. He stood there for a long time, the barrel of his bolt pistol aimed at my head, and I could almost hear the grinding of the gears in his mind as his entire worldview was challenged. He had been raised to believe that heresy was a simple, absolute thing, an infection to be burned out. But here, in this cave, faced with the ghost of my past and the broken thing I had become, he was confronted with a truth that was messy, tragic, and profoundly human. He was a man who dealt in black and white, and I had dragged him into a world of infinite, sorrowful gray. "No," he said finally, lowering his weapon. The word was quiet, but it was the loudest, most significant thing he had ever said to me. It was an act of rebellion, a refusal of his function. In that moment, he, too, had become a heretic of a sort, a heretic of compassion. "Your penance is not over," he said, but it was clear he was speaking the words of his old self, trying to find a justification for his new, incomprehensible feelings. "Your service is still required." It was a lie, and we both knew it. My service was not required. I was a broken tool. This was an act of something else. Pity? Friendship? He probably didn't have a name for it himself. It was a crack in the perfect, cold facade of his faith. We left the cave in silence. Our report on the mission was a masterpiece of obfuscation, a document I helped him craft. We reported that the cult had been wiped out by the exterminatus, that the psychic echoes were residual, and that the case was closed. We lied. Together, the loyal, fanatical Inquisitor and the damned, soul-shattered acolyte. We filed a false report to the holy Ordos of the Inquisition, an act that would have seen us both executed without question. It was a secret between us, a shared sin, and it changed everything. Our journey back to the veracity was quiet. We did not speak of what had happened, but it was a living presence in the space between us. I was still a broken thing, but I was no longer completely alone in my damnation. Someone else had seen the truth of the machine, even if it was just a glimpse, and he had chosen to look away, to protect the flawed human component within it. When we returned, I voluntarily submitted myself for psychic cleansing and memory realignment. I told the chirurgeons that the residual energies of the dead world had destabilized me. I asked them to reinforce the mnemonic locks on my original memories. I asked them to bury Lyran again, deeper this time. I had seen what remembering brought. It brought a pain too great to bear. It was better to be a functional monster than a self-aware, shattered man. It was better to be a tool that did not feel. They obliged. They saw it as a logical request, a course correction for a malfunctioning asset. They plunged me back into the darkness, burying the ghost of the craftsman and his sorrowful library under new layers of psychic concrete. They thought they were repairing me, but I knew better. This time, I was not the victim of the process. I was its willing collaborator. I was choosing the prison. I was choosing the emptiness, because the alternative, the freedom to feel the full weight of my own tragedy, was a hell even greater than the one they had designed for me. The last thing I felt before the ghost of Lyran was locked away again was a strange sense of gratitude towards Kale. The zealot, the butcher, the man who had, in a moment of incomprehensible grace, refused to grant me the mercy of death, and in doing so, had given me something far more valuable. A single, shared moment of broken, heretical humanity. Decades passed. Kale and I continued our work, but the unspoken truth of the Cave of Mirrors was always between us. He became more pragmatic, more cynical. I saw the first hints of weariness in his eyes, the first cracks in his iron certainty. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back. He still served the Imperium with ruthless efficiency, but the fire of the zealot had been replaced by the cold, grim determination of a man who knows he is serving a necessary but flawed God. And I continued to be the mnemonic scourge. I wore the souls of 100 more heretics, traitors, and Xenos sympathizers. My mind became a crowded, silent metropolis of ghosts. The personality of Lyran was buried deep, a foundation of sorrow upon which the entire teetering skyscraper was built. I no longer fought the process. I had accepted my function. I was a weapon, and a weapon does not have the luxury of a conscience. My existence was a scar on the face of the galaxy, a testament to the brutal necessities of the 41st millennium. I had become the perfect inquisitorial agent, a being who could understand the soul of the enemy, who could think like them, feel like them, and use that intimacy to destroy them, all without the risk of genuine sympathy, because my own capacity for genuine emotion had been surgically replaced with a deep, abiding, and functional despair. My story is not one of redemption. There is no redemption in the grim darkness of the far future. There is only service, and the various prices one pays for it. My price was my soul, my name, the very concept of a singular self. I am a committee of dead men. I am a chorus of damned souls. I am a library of forbidden knowledge, and the only person with a key is the Inquisitor who holds my leash. This is what it is to be chosen by the Inquisition. It is to be told that you are essential, and in the same breath, to be told that you do not matter. It is to be given a holy purpose that is achieved through the most unholy of means. It is to be made into a monster to fight monsters, and to be forced to see the terrible, familial resemblance in their eyes. I have no hope for a future. I have no real memory of a past. I have only the present moment, this mission, this ghost that I am currently wearing. And when this mission is over, they will pour him out and pour another in. A new set of sins, a new life to live, a new death to die. My name was Lyran, I think. I was a craftsman. I made beautiful things out of the memories of the dead. Now, I am a weapon, and I am made of the same.